What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 college football schedule preview and very early projected record series. The Cincinnati Bearcats are up next. Before we look ahead to 2025, let's take a look back at what Cincinnati did in 2024. Here are my projections and predictions last year for Cincinnati. My projection for this team was 5-7, and then my prediction for them was 4-8. So yeah, I got the projection right, but I was a little bit under on my prediction. So yeah, Cincinnati actually did better than my actual prediction, but I was right on the money with their projection at 5-7. So yeah, Cincinnati coming off a 5-7 year. Wouldn't really say it's a disappointing year for Cincinnati. It was kind of a better season, compared to the year before in 2023. I think they just went 3-9 in Scott Satterfield's first year, but a little bit of an improvement in year 2 under Scott Satterfield, but still not able to make it to a bowl game in 2024. Looking at the schedule from last year for Cincinnati as well, you look at the non-conference schedule. First off, they played Townsend, and then also they played Pittsburgh out of the ACC. Then they played Miami of Ohio University Redhawks there on September 14th. So they didn't have a tough non-conference schedule whatsoever, but they lost to Pittsburgh. I mean, it's not a bad loss for them, but they lost to Pittsburgh there on September the 7th at home. Then looking at their Big 12 schedule, first off, who they played at home last year, they played Houston, Arizona State, West Virginia, and then TCU. So 4 home games in the Big 12, and then on the road, they played Texas Tech, Colorado, Iowa State, Kansas State. That's kind of a tough road schedule. Texas Tech, UCF, Colorado, Iowa State, and Kansas State. So yeah, 5 tough road games, and then you look at the entire schedule for Cincinnati. 5-7 record. They got off to a really good start. First half of the year, this team actually was 5-2. They were actually 1 win away from actually making it to a bowl game, and then once they got into the second half of the year, that stretch there from October 26th to the end of the season, they lost 5 games in a row, and they just were 1 win away from being bowl eligible. So yeah, a really good start to the first half of the year for Cincinnati, and then second half of the year, it just went downhill from there for the Bearcats. They lost their last 5 games of the regular season. But let's now look ahead to 2025. This is the schedule for Cincinnati coming up, and before we go game by game, let's take a look at who Cincinnati's non-conference opponents will be this year. So you look at their non-conference schedule, they will, of course, play Nebraska out of the Big Ten, and that will be on a neutral site field. They'll be playing that game in Kansas City. That's actually going to be on a Thursday, so they played this one on a weeknight and everything. It's kind of hard to prepare for these weeknight games, but it is week 1. We don't really know how good the teams are until we get at least like 4 games in or something like that, but they'll play Nebraska here, in Kansas City, and then the rest of their non-conference games, they'll play Bowling Green out of the MAC, and then they play Northwestern State, an FCS team. They'll absolutely be big favorites against Northwestern State, but Bowling Green, that could be a tricky one. Bowling Green actually in the last couple of years has shown that they could be a competitive team at times against Power 4 teams. So that's your non-conference schedule. Let's now take a look at the home games in the Big 12 for Cincinnati. They will play Iowa State, UCF, Baylor, Arizona, and then also BYU, all at home in the Big 12. So 5 home games in the Big 12. Iowa State, that's definitely a game you'd like to have at home here for the Bearcats. Maybe same thing with Baylor and BYU. Baylor is going to be a pretty solid team. This has a chance to be like a top 25 team. Obviously, BYU was pretty good last year. And then obviously UCF and Arizona. Those are winnable games there for the Bearcats, and they're both at home. UCF going with the coaching change. We'll see how good they are. And Arizona, we'll see if they can turn things around as well. So that's your home schedule. Let's now take a look at the road games in the Big 12 for Cincinnati. They will play on the road at Kansas, at Oklahoma State, then Utah, and then also TCU. So just looking at this away schedule, it's pretty difficult for Cincinnati. Kansas is not a very tough place to play, but Oklahoma State, Utah, and TCU, those are 3 tricky road games there for Cincinnati. Oklahoma State and Utah, they were not really good last year, but wouldn't be surprised if both of those teams in the Big 12 turn things around. But, TCU, that's also going to be probably a tough game to go up against there, especially on the road. So, yeah, kind of a tough road schedule here for Cincinnati. Let's go back to the schedule now and go full game by game now for the Bearcats. Again, they'll kick things off on a Thursday, August 28th. They'll play Nebraska here. in Kansas City. Again, a huge non-conference game there to kick off the season for the Bearcats, and then they play Bowling Green on September the 6th, and then Northwestern State on September 13th. So they play all three of their non-conference opponents in the first 3 weeks. So there's a pretty good chance that Cincinnati could start out 3-0 and then also 2-1 depending on what happens in that Nebraska game. And then they actually get a bye week here right after those non-conference games. They jump into Big 12 play coming out of the bye week on the road at Kansas on September 27th, and then they play at home against Iowa State on October the 4th, and then also at home against UCF on October the 11th. Then it's back on the road to play Oklahoma State on October 18th. Then you got Baylor at home the next week on October 25th. November 1st, they'll play Utah on the road, and then they get another bye week. So their bye weeks are kind of at a separate time. Their first bye week comes right early in the year, and then, of course, the second one doesn't come until the month of November. So those bye weeks are kind of separate a little bit. That's what the difference is between those bye weeks. And then they play Arizona coming out of the bye week on November 15th. Then they also got BYU on November 22nd at home. And then they got TCU to close things out on November 29th. So just looking at the schedule, you got Nebraska in the non-conference, and then a few Big 12, games that will be tough for them, but they don't have any back-to-back road games, which I think is good news. Arizona and BYU and back-to-back home games, and then same thing with Iowa State and UCF. Yeah, plenty of opportunities here for Cincinnati to get like a few wins, but can they make a bowl game? That's going to be probably the goal here for 2025. Let's now get a projection and find out. This is the scale we'll be using here for their official projection. Basically, a 1% game in the red, that's pretty much going to be counted as an automatic loss. And then your 20% games in the orange, that's where Cincinnati will be about a double-digit underdog. And then 40% in the yellow, they'll be about a clear underdog, so about less than a touchdown, 6 or 7 points. And then your 50-50 games, those will stay in the white. Those are games that really can go either way. 60% in the purple, that's where Cincinnati will be favored by, about less than a touchdown, 6 or 7 points. 80% in the blue, they'll be favored by double digits, and then your 99% games in the green, those are pretty much your automatic wins. So we'll start with the easy wins here for Cincinnati. I think you've got a couple of them, and they're both in the non-conference, Bowling Green and Northwestern State. Yeah, I think Cincinnati will be favored in both of these games by 20 plus, somewhere in that particular range, although Bowling Green, I wouldn't be surprised if Cincinnati kind of did struggle against the Falcons. Again, I mentioned about Bowling Green being a solid group of 5 team out of the MAC. They've kind of, been competitive against Power 4 teams in the last couple of years. We've kind of seen that for this team. So maybe I wouldn't be surprised if Cincinnati probably lose this game, but these are 2 games that Cincinnati definitely should win. There's no business for them to lose both of these games. Obviously, Northwestern State is a FCS team. They definitely should be able to win that game fairly easily. So those are your 2 easy wins for Cincinnati. And then you look at the rest of the schedule. Not any more games that you can favor the Bearcats here by either double digits in the blue and then same thing in the purple by 6 or 7 points. But I do got a few games on here where I think Cincinnati is going to be a heavy underdog, and when I say heavy, that comes in the yellow. They're not in the red or the orange, but those are in the yellow. 4 games here where I think Cincinnati is going to be a clear underdog. It's Iowa State, Baylor, BYU, and TCU. So all these 4 games, Cincinnati will definitely have a pretty good chance to pull off an upset here or two. Iowa State, that will be a pretty tough game, and then same thing with BYU, but maybe they can pull off an upset against Baylor. Let's say Baylor is probably ranked in the top 25. That is definitely probably an upset alert game there for the Bearcats that they can absolutely win. Because these games are at home, that's the reason why they are in the yellow. And at TCU, just because it's on the road, that's the reason why it drops into the yellow instead of like a 50-50 game. So, yeah, Cincinnati will be clear underdogs in these 4 games, but they'll definitely have a chance to either at least win one of these games, or maybe they can probably split them. They can probably win a couple of these games in the yellow. Then, yeah, that'll probably give you to a bowl game if you win at least a couple of games, or maybe just one of them. So, yeah, Cincinnati definitely has a big chance in all 4 of these games. Again, all these teams are going to be pretty solid teams in the Big 12. And they are definitely going to be decent as well. But yeah, Cincinnati will be a 6 or 7 point underdog in all 4 of these games, so by less than a touchdown. And then that's going to leave you with 6 50-50 games. Nebraska, Kansas, UCF, Oklahoma State, Utah, and Arizona. I think Nebraska might be the better team than Cincinnati as of right now, like the more talented team. Nebraska might be the favorite as of right now. I think Nebraska probably could be favored by less than a field goal, maybe like 4 points or less, to be honest. But as of right now, just because it's on a neutral field, I'm kind of having a hard time picking that game, to be honest. But I would favor Nebraska as of right now. And then Kansas, UCF, Oklahoma State, Utah, and Arizona. These are all pretty even matchups, in my opinion, for Cincinnati. So what does the projected record come out to be here for the Bearcats for 2025 based on how tough this schedule is? Well, we count the 2 green games as wins, and then you average out the 4 games in the yellow at 40%, and then average out these 6 games in the 50-50 range at 50%. And let's say they split them. Let's say they win at least 3 out of the 6. They'll get 3 wins. It could be either against Nebraska, Kansas, or UCF, and then they probably lose to Oklahoma State, Utah, and Arizona. And then they'll obviously be underdogs in those 4 games in the yellow. But you count the green games as the wins, and then your 3 50-50 games. That's going to give you a total of 5 wins. That is what the projection is. 5-7 here for Cincinnati based on how tough this schedule is. It's not a tough schedule, but it's definitely a schedule they can definitely go to a bowl game for. Cincinnati could probably be at best go to a bowl game at 6-6. That's probably the best case scenario, and then worst case like 4-8. But if they go 3-9 or like 4-8 at worst, then yeah, Scott Satterfield might be not the right guy for this Cincinnati job. But again, 5-7 is what the projected record is based on this schedule for 2025 for the Bearcats. Can Cincinnati make it to a bowl game in 2025? Let me guys know what you think about Cincinnati, and give me your projection down in the comments below for the Bearcats for 2025. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.